Twisted coasters, launch coasters, and the UK's best coaster, I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is Coasting into Alton Towers. So today it's off to Alton Towers, and I'm just arriving just now. This is the second day since lockdown has eased in the UK. Yesterday it was at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and today it's Alton Towers. It seems like quite a nice day today. It's a current temperature outside of 7 degrees Celsius, which is still pretty cold. I think it's only set to get up to 10, so again, in Fahrenheit that's probably in the region of like 40 to 50, something like that. Right, well that's me parked up, so let's head into Alton Towers. Alton Towers is one of the most interesting and unique amusement parks in the world, and despite its location being quite far from most major cities, it's probably the most well-known and famous of all the UK's parks. The key thing about Alton Towers, and something that's shaped its history and its rides, is the unique planning restrictions that it faces. A lot of the most famous parks in the world can quite easily challenge for world record rides, building them taller and faster, but Alton Towers is severely restricted in that every ride it builds has to be below the level of the tree line. Rather than settle for building less thrilling rides, however, Alton Towers has overcome these planning restrictions in different creative ways, and it's still managed to break world records and achieve several world firsts, even if some of those world firsts are somewhat dubious these days. Nowhere is Alton Towers' creativity in overcoming restrictions more apparent than with their signature and flagship roller coaster Nemesis. This is simply a magnificent ride, and in my opinion it's still the best roller coaster in the whole of the UK, even some 27 years after it first opened. It was the first B&M inverted coaster to be built outside of America, and in order to make it fit with the restrictions, Alton Towers had to excavate a huge area, basically digging a large pit to put the roller coaster in. This means that the ride spends a lot of time low to the ground, diving through ravines and tunnels, and the way different terrain constantly flies past you creates an incredible sense of speed. Its pacing is nigh on flawless, and I'm sure it will continue to thrill riders for many years to come. Nemesis is actually the oldest roller coaster in the park, apart from a powered mine train, and it was the first of Alton Towers' secret weapon projects that saw the light of day. These secret weapon projects were the codenames given to future record-breaking or world-first attractions to be built at the park, and the next one to be completed was Oblivion, the world's first vertical drop roller coaster, which was marketed with a bit of a lie. At 87.5 degrees, the ride is certainly steep, but not vertical, and when it opened, the Intamin reverse freefall coasters Superman and Tower of Terror were both already open, and they had genuine vertical drops. That's not to detract from this milestone coaster though, as Oblivion still provides a unique thrill. As the first ever dive coaster, it's a master of suspense as you travel up the lift hill very slowly, and then you're dangled tantalisingly over the edge before you drop. Despite Oblivion only having an above ground height of about 60 feet, the drop is an incredible 180 feet, with 2/3 of it in the darkness of a hole, and because you're dropping into that darkness, you can't see the end of the drop as you fall. The rest of the ride is incredibly short, only consisting of an overbanked turn that takes you back into the brake run, but the ride is really just all about that drop, which at the time it opened was unlike anything else you could experience in the world. Right next to Oblivion we have another of Alton Towers' secret weapon projects, the Smiler, and current world record holder for the most inversions on any roller coaster in the world. It's a very impressive feat just how much twisted track they managed to cram into this space, and when you have two trains seeming to duel at the same time, it's quite the visual spectacle. Personally, I'm not the Smiler's biggest fan, as I've explained in a previous video where I think its inversions should be a bit more varied, but it's still an insanely twisty ride and has lasting popularity with the visitors to the park. The ride is built around a centrepiece that's like a giant mechanical spider that subjects you to special effects during the ride, although you fly past so quickly that these are barely noticeable as part of the overall ride experience. It's hard to really concentrate on anything as the ride hurls you through its sequence of half corkscrews and half loops that make up the bulk of the elements, and it's almost good in a way that there's a pause to catch your breath before the second lift hill of the ride. Whilst the first lift hill is a standard one, the second one is vertical and can be a bit intimidating for some, and whilst I prefer it if there was a launch instead of a second lift hill, it does add a bit of variety to the ride. During my visit, the queue line had to be closed several times during the day as it reached the maximum capacity, and when I did get in it was quite a long wait before I could ride. Once I did get on it though, it was good fun, but I can't hide that it's really getting quite rough nowadays. There's always been a bit of a nasty jolt as it exits the Cobra roll element, but there are other jolts added now, and there's some really rather rough sections of track. The track no doubt takes quite a bit of a beating throughout the day, as the ride can operate with 5 trains and that gives a high throughput, but there's a lot of force being exerted onto the track. The coaster's only 8 years old, but Gerstlauer coasters just don't seem to age all that well, and it certainly feels like a bit of work could be done to make it smoother. And in an ideal world, it could add trains with lap bars instead of the bulky over-the-shoulder restraints that it's got now. The Smiler replaced a favourite of many at Alton Towers, a roller coaster in the dark known as the Black Hole, which sadly I never got to ride. Growing up some 420 miles away from Alton Towers in the north of Scotland meant that unlike a lot of my current friends and fellow UK enthusiasts, I never got to visit the Towers during its formative years in the 80s and 90s. However, it may still be possible for me to ride some of their classic coasters, as rather than being scrapped, a lot of them moved to other parks after they'd served their time at Alton Towers. Thunderlooper, Four-Man Bob and the Alton Mouse now operate under different names at other parks around the world, and the Black Hole is currently going by the name of Rocket, and is thrilling riders at a zoo in Sweden called Furuvik. I do hope to revisit Sweden when travelling is allowed again, so perhaps I will eventually get to ride the Black Hole, and can ride it with my eyes closed to simulate the original Alton Towers experience. Something else that may be better in the dark is Alton Towers' newest coaster, the Wicker Man. As it is the newest coaster, annoyingly it does tend to have the longest queues, and I had to wait about 90 minutes to ride it on this occasion. It was the first brand new wooden coaster to be built in the UK in over 20 years, and so enthusiasts were quite excited when it was announced. Unfortunately though, in my opinion, it didn't quite reach the potential that it could have had, and turned into more of a family ride than the airtime-filled wooden monster that I'd hoped it could have been. It's not a bad ride at all, but if you compare it to other coasters built by its manufacturer GCI around the same time, such as Mystic Timbers or some of their coasters in China, it's just nowhere near as good. The main problem, I think, is that it feels as if it's crammed into a space not quite big enough for it. No sooner have you gone over an element than you're hitting a corner to try and keep the ride within its bounds. It's like there's no space to have any decent-sized airtime hills. Rides like Mystic Timbers benefit from their long out and back layouts, as these long stretches of track can form fast airtime hills, but Wicker Man just doesn't seem to have enough space to accomplish this, and it feels quite slow in the corners as well. The ending is also quite lackluster, as it almost seems like there's something missing as you hit the brakes and then just go into this long dark tunnel with nothing in it that takes you back into the station. The one place where Wicker Man does excel though is in its theming, which has to be some of the best of any wooden coaster in the world, although the actual choice of theming does seem a bit weird. Whilst it isn't directly related to it, The Wicker Man is a 1973 British horror film about a devout Christian policeman visiting an island in search of a missing person, and it includes a surprising amount of nudity, and ends with him being burnt alive in a giant Wicker Man effigy. I mean, choosing human sacrifice as the theme of your family wooden coaster does seem a bit odd, right? The other slightly unusual thing about the backstory is how the Bjornen, the local people who supposedly worship the Wicker Man and tell the story of it in its pre-show, all seem to have Scottish accents as opposed to something a bit more indigenous to the region. All in all, it's a bit of an odd theme, but I can't deny that the smoke and fire effects and Wicker Man effigy itself do look pretty cool, particularly at night, and it's a real shame that Alton Towers is so rarely open after dark so people don't get to see it when it's at its best. There's another really well-themed attraction at Alton Towers that I should also mention, although sadly it was closed during my visit due to the current restrictions. Hex, the Legend of the Towers is a must-do though if you visit the park and it's open. It's a Vekoma Madhouse, which is a ride that gives the illusion of the entire room rotating around you while you swing back and forth. Now lots of parks have a version of this ride, but I think Alton Towers may very well be the best one. The way it's built into the ruins of the towers and how it links to local legends really makes for an impressive ride. And the soundtrack's fantastic as well. Whilst Hex was closed, all the roller coasters remained running, although some of them had modified seating, and for some reason the back train of all of the cars of 13 were filled with water dummies. 13 was another of Alton Towers' secret weapon projects, and truth be told, it's a rather strange coaster. It's a family ride, but has quite a dark and spooky theme, including a jump scare in the queue line with a gigantic Tesla coil. As for the ride experience, one of the first things you'll notice is the rather strong and aggressive trim brake that's on the first drop, which is a bit disappointing, and then the ride meanders into the forest over a few hills that give some very light airtime. Annoyingly, most of the coaster is hidden from view at this point, which makes it quite difficult to film. The world first secret weapon part of the ride occurs around halfway, when the train comes to a stop in a building, and the track falls away vertically, a unique feature when it opened, but one that's since been repeated on several other coasters, such as Bolton and Wonder Mountain Guardian. After the drop, you're then launched backwards into the dark through some helixes, before a switch track sends you forward and into the station again. Overall, it's a decent ride, but one that can't quite seem to decide on what market it's trying to be aimed at. Right next to 13 though is a ride that's well and truly for thrill seekers, Rita, formerly subtitled Queen of Speed. Strangely, Rita was the only recent rollercoaster addition to Alton Towers that didn't have a secret weapon codename, although the name Rita kind of hides a code within it. When spelled backwards, ATIR, it stands for Alton Towers Intamin Rocket, with Intamin being the manufacturer of the ride and Rocket Coaster the model. The UK had seen several launch coasters before, with the likes of Revolution at Blackpool Pleasure Beach still providing high thrills to this day, but a new technology had recently debuted in American coasters, which featured hydraulic launches that allowed impressive acceleration and higher top speeds than anything seen before. 2 years before the opening of Rita, the world record for height and speed had been utterly smashed by the 120 mph, 420 foot tall Top Thrill dragster at Cedar Point. Now obviously Alton Towers could never build a ride that tall, but the acceleration was something that they would like to feature. Rather than having a large top hat element to go over, after Rita's launch it goes straight into a number of banked turns and high-speed hills that give some decent airtime. It's a short ride because the train travels so quickly, but one that's remained popular since it's opened. The launch has a good strong kick to it, and there's a nice mix of positive and negative G in the layout. Interestingly, the ride is a nearly identical clone of it built at Heide Park in Germany that goes by the name of Desert Race, but I think the woodland setting of Rita makes it a bit more memorable. The final large roller coaster at Alton Towers is Galactica, previously known as Air, which was the first ever B&M flying coaster to open. It is a unique layout as just like Alton Towers' other coasters, it has to stay low to the ground, so there's no big pretzel loops or zero-G rolls here. Instead you have what I consider to be quite a relaxing ride, with gentle swoops and slow twists as the train moves gracefully along the track. The only bits I find slightly awkward are the turns where you're on your back, as I find the sensation just a bit weird, although I suspect this is necessary as experiencing positive G is much more comfortable when you're on your back than on your front. The ride was renamed from Air to Galactica for the 2016 season, when it had a bit of a makeover and had VR added. Now the VR was actually quite well done, but it hasn't offered this for a couple of years now, as the VR rollercoaster fad seems to have been fairly short-lived in general. The Galactica name however remains rather than the original Air, and it's still a fun ride which complements Alton Towers' lineup really nicely. For the 2021 season, Alton Towers has added a couple of 80s inspired flat rides, however none of these really particularly appealed to me, so I prioritised riding the roller coasters over everything else. It was a bit disappointing though that the queue times were generally quite long, but I still managed to ride everything that I wanted to. All too soon though the clock struck 8 PM and it was time to leave the park. And so that ends a really fun day at Alton Towers. I think the battery on my camera is about to die, so this will probably get cut short. But it's been a fun day. Quite a long day as the park was open till 8 o'clock, which is nice for a change. Usually the park would shut at 4 at this time of year. And I think you're getting a bit of a bum deal if that's the case, because I only really had enough time to do everything that I wanted, with things moving a bit slower because of the COVID restrictions. I finished tonight with a evening sunset ride on Nemesis in the front seat, and you can't get much more perfect than that in the UK. Nemesis is just an absolutely phenomenal ride. I still think it's the best ride in the UK. And one of, if not the best, inverted coasters built by B&M. It's just such a fantastic, incredible ride. All in all, I think Alton Towers is probably my favourite park in the UK. Its collection of rides offers a really great variety, the gardens are beautiful, and of course, Nemesis is an absolute beast of a roller coaster. If you enjoyed this video, please check out some of the other ones on my channel, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any more content from me in the near future. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.